when living up in Atlanta now, when you describe Americus to people, how do you describe Americus?
I describe it today as a place that has great potential. I've seen a lot of changes. I'm excited now about when I come here now and I see young people engage a lot. I was talking to a friend who has a business down on the corner down here. I'm excited that they're excited about the opportunities that they see here. That's very significant for me because it's something that I've always wanted, I've always envisioned. Didn't quite see when I was here, but when I actually live here. But I'm encouraged by that when I come back now and see that.
That is good.
There's excitement and there's opportunity, I believe.
Welcome to the Americus Podcast, where we're learning what it means to become a next level neighbor, creating a place we enjoy with the people that we love. Today, I am joined by Sam Mahone. Sam, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
You're certainly welcome.
Now, Sam is the chairman of the Americus Sumter County Remembered Committee. And Sam, I got a chance to talk with you just briefly over the phone and through email. I moved here in March of last year, and we did a lot of driving around. We did a little bit of some historic monuments, and we're trying to figure out, there's so much history in Americus. And when I started asking questions, your name was one of the first that just kept coming up. And so just know that you've made an impact here, that people value you here. And so I went ahead and gave you a call, and you just graciously said, yes, I'll come and spend a little bit of time with us on the podcast. And so I would love to hear just a little bit of some of the great inspirations. Before we kind of dive into your life, what have been some great inspirations, both in person and maybe even in writing or art, that have helped you kind of mold and shape the view of the world that you have?
I think probably when I became a high school student and I became engaged with local merchants on Cotton Avenue, which used to be at that time the epicenter of black commerce in Americus. The street was lined with black businesses, and there was a gentleman by the name of Sam Weston who ran a tailor shop. His wife ran a soda shop next door on Cotton Avenue. Mr. Weston was president of what was called the Negro Business League at that time. But he also was very concerned about community issues, and he began a voter registration campaign. This was 1962. Sumter County at that time had a population of, the population was like 52% African American, and so it had that advantage, but there were no registered voters. There were maybe 125 registered voters.
Oh, wow.
And so after school, I would go to Mr. Weston's shop, as many other kids would do, and he actually recruited us to canvass door to door, getting people to really register to vote. And that's how I became engaged in that kind of activism, and that led to me being nurtured later on by the civil rights movement that began a year later in the city.
Wow. Anyone in particular from that stage, that movement, or any? We'll talk about this in just a minute. You actually had an oral historic interview, which I thought was really, really great. In fact, you can go to YouTube. You can type in Sam Mahone Civil Rights. It's really, really good. It's about an hour and a half, or about an hour and 30 minutes or less, about an hour and 3 minutes maybe. Really, really good. But you had described just people, and then maybe even some books that you started reading at a young age. You were just like, I didn't even know these existed. And these, it was writers. It was, so tell me a little bit about maybe some of those influences as well.
Well, in 62, Dr. King, who had been arrested in Albany, Georgia, during the Albany movement, was brought here to be jailed in the Sumter County Jail. They said it was for his protection. And that created a lot of excitement, particularly among people my age at that time, because we heard about what had been going on in Albany, and we're intrigued about those actions taken on by the Albany State students. Shortly after that, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which had been working out of Albany and throughout Southwest Georgia, decided to send some workers to Americus to expand the outreach of voter registration. It was mostly voter registration, trying to get people registered to vote. And I immediately was drawn to them. And what intrigued me for the most part was that most of the volunteers at SNCC were from the North. They'd come south as students to devote a year, or maybe a year or two, from their studies to work in the civil rights movement. And with them, they brought a lot of books that I had never seen before. Of course, Black history was non-existent in our schools. The books we grew up with in our schools, from grade school to high school, we never got a new book. The books were always 3 or 4 years behind. They were torn, they were tattered, pages were missing, and that's what so we knew as students that by the time we graduated, we were 2 years behind, probably.
Wow.
But that's the condition that existed at that time. So they brought books by authors like James Baldwin, all kinds of artists that we had never heard of before, Yeah. And so we resonated toward them. Those books resonated with us, and there was what they call a SNCC house, the offices for these civil rights workers. Okay. And we would go to those houses in the evening after we got out of school and see these books, and we would study them and look at them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things when we talk about the podcast, we talk about the idea of neighboring well together, this idea of becoming a next level neighbor. And we want to figure out what those values are, because if the values are there, they'll be expressed in some way. And one of the values that I've just noticed in just listening to your history and your story are things like sacrifice, diligence, determination. These are needed for even today in our daily life interactions with one another as things become more hostile, or where we kind of find ourselves kind of locked into our phones and into our computers and not locked into, we have a neighbor that's next to us. What are they engaged in? And so you have to be intentional if you're going to be a good neighbor, if you're going to be working towards reconciliation, if you're going to be working towards some form of this movement. And so I love the fact that you have this determination in your story. It's encouraging to me. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that as you kind of share a little bit about who you are growing up. But that's one of the things that was so encouraging to me. I read a book called The Infinity Game, where it's the idea is it's not about the wins and losses, but it's about surviving the game. It's about staying in the game as long as you can. And I just noticed that about your story is there's a lot of wins, there's a lot of losses, but the idea wasn't that. It was, we're going to keep going no matter what. And so share a little bit about your story growing up, kind of your family dynamics, and kind of how you got to be a part of a movement like this.
Yeah. Growing up here, there's certain things that you just grow up with and you don't question, because that's how things were. But we knew, and as African Americans in this town, we knew that the conditions were not right, and so we this was informed by how we reacted to how our parents reacted to circumstances around the city, and it was just a period of where the conditions were just black and white in terms of what my parents were able to do, what my neighbors, what I saw them doing, and what they were not able to do. The system was set up so that we knew that we were lived a life of second-class citizenship, but that we felt that at some point when the civil rights movement came here, we felt at least that there was an option for us to do some things to better our situation. That's what really informed me initially to get involved and engage, to care about the things around me, not only around me, but to make sure that I wasn't just concerned about my own condition.
Yeah, were you kind of a curious person? Were you an extrovert, introvert, kind of growing up? Kind of what was going on in your mind and your heart just during that time, just kind of growing up?
Well, as a kid, you see right away how the two-tiered system, how it was, when you would go downtown and how the class system and race and class was something that was always present. And so even though you didn't fight it at that time, you just felt that something wasn't quite right. So when the opportunity came from somebody came and said that we can change this by becoming more engaged in the political process, then I gravitated toward that because there was no singular instance that got me engaged in the movement, but it was just a combination of things of having to grow up in a system that you could see these inequities, but you felt hopeless that you couldn't do anything about it. And you felt that way because of how your parents lived, and how they would talk to you and tell you that, this is the way it is. You can't change it. But as a kid, you grow up and after you've internalized these things, you recognize that there is something that can be done. There's something better. And we just needed that push of somebody that came in and say that there is another way. Wow. So that informed me in terms of how I should lead my life, in terms of how I should not just look out for myself, but to look out for my community and the people around me. Yeah, so to make it better.
There's a time where internally you are experiencing that and you're trying to wrestle with how much you should give yourself to this, and then you've got that moment in time where you said, "Okay, this is the road that I'm going to travel," and you had people coming in and coming out. You had organizations coming in, coming out. Were there certain markers? Because I think even as young people, I mean, I'm 38. I'm no longer as young as I want to be, but 25-year-old, 20-year-olds, they're probably in that moment too, where they're like, "Okay, I see that there's something." But it does take time and constant engagement of other people pouring into their lives. Were there certain markers that you noticed that were just helpful to you to say, I went from knowing that there was something that I needed to do and actually doing it? Were there certain things that you can share with us?
Well, I think when I became engaged in that one-on-one contact, going to door-to-door, working with people, and having these conversations with people, I got to see just how much they wanted change but felt powerless to do anything. And that's what has driven me from that point to today. I mean, that's been my commitment. And even though I've done other things in terms of work, and this has been part of my this is what I've been I feel has been my mission in life, is to go ahead and try and do what I can do to make the situation better for people, and to make those changes that will uplift people, and to make to empower them. And so
that's good. Well, if people haven't heard your story, they may hear this and go, okay, but what kind of maybe challenges as you've moved into being a part of change, making a difference? And I've used this on the podcast a few times. You in this world, you can make a point or you can make a difference. And normally people make a point by putting something just on Facebook, and they're just kind of, it's like a rant. It's words, and even though it may be truthful, they're personally not engaged in it enough relationally to see that actually come to fruition. And so I always encourage people, don't just make a point, make a difference. That requires sacrifice. It requires sitting down. It requires working. And so when I hear your story, you're not just making points. You are part of making a difference here in Americus. And so what were some obstacles? What were some forms of just huge pushback, maybe from the city or anything like that, so that people can kind of hear your story a little bit on this podcast and go, yeah, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Well, once I became engaged in the movement, and I was part of the first demonstration here at the Martin Theater, which used to be the local theater here. And when I got arrested, along with 11 other people, we were bailed out the next day on probation. What I didn't recognize was that being on probation, if you got arrested again, you couldn't be bailed out. You had to serve that time. So I was arrested again 1 week later, and I had a 90-day probation period. So they immediately put us in the city prison. And we initially decided we were not going to work. We felt we hadn't done anything wrong. We simply tried to buy tickets at the front window of the Martin Theater, and we were denied that and arrested. When we resisted work, they put us in a hole in this Sumter County courthouse. And it was at that point, in that hole, in that darkness, we recognized that there were people who were willing to literally destroy us because we wanted to be treated equally. And I think that that's what molded me more than anything else, that when I got out of that hole, that I would be, that would be part of my DNA to continue to fight for equal rights and equal justice in Americus, and hope that somehow would help the struggle which is going on around the country at that time. That's never left me. I always tell people, even though I don't live here, I don't live in Americus, but Americus lives in me. I was informed by the struggle that I was engaged in here.
Yes.
That's why I'm still on this mission that I am now. But it's not about me. It's about the next generation. It's always about the next generation, because I stand on the shoulders of those people like Sam Weston of the Negro Business League, who informed me and cared enough about me to take me in and teach me that there was something more important than trying to get to the next school teen dance or the next soda fountain, and what have you. And that stayed with me to this day.
So how do you go from being involved in this movement, knowing, I mean, like you just said, how do you just try to find a career and do those types of things when you know the struggle that's taking place and all the obstacles? I mean, what did your life look like after that? I mean, did you go to college? What was your thought process? What did you want to do to be a part of this movement?
Yeah. Of course, when I later on went to, when I graduated high school, I went to Tougaloo College, and I had planned to major in sociology. I left there after a couple of years, and I went to work, and I started work at the Department of Archives and History and Restoration, paper restoration.
How did you find that job?
Well, that's interesting, because when I worked in Americus during the Civil Rights Movement, there was a local attorney, Ben Fortson, a white attorney, who became a supporter of the movement, in a sense. He was the brother of the then Secretary of State, Ben Fortson.
Okay.
Warren Fortson had an office not too far from here. When you talk to Robertina, she'll tell you more about him, because he was the attorney that defended her in court.
Wow. At
one point. And for that, he was run out of town. He was run out of Americus. I think Warren is still alive. He was in Atlanta. I think he's still with us, I believe. But there were people like that who stepped out of the shadows and risked their lives as well here, who he was at one point became a mentor to people in the city, African Americans in the city, and from that point he did a lot of work and represented African Americans in court, and but he was actually run out of town later on. Yeah.
Wow. So now you're working in the archives. What's your life like then? I mean, what are you thinking about? Where are you going?
The way I got there was that Ben Forson, who was Secretary of State, the Department of Archives is under his division. And so I was at Tougaloo at college, and Warren Forson had come there to speak. And so he asked me what I was going to be doing, and I said, well, I'm going to be leaving school because I need to go find work. Mm-hmm. I couldn't afford to stay there. So he said, well, go by my brother's office, Ben Forson. And so I went there when I came back to Atlanta, and he sent me to the archives, and I was hired as a they put me in a program to learn how to do paper restoration. Mm-hmm. And so I became a conservator, paper restoration. And I did that for about 13 years.
Wow.
But at the same time, I became engaged in political activity in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. There were the engagement that I had started in here, that stayed with me. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were things going on in Atlanta in terms of workers' strikes, workers trying to organize for better wages and what have you. I became engaged in that. I had been, while at Tougaloo, I had been an advocate for resistance to the Vietnam War.
Okay.
In fact, Tougaloo College was the only African-American college in the country at that time that had built a resistance movement against the war in Vietnam. Wow. And so I became part of that movement. So the activism that started here stayed with me in different causes wherever I was, even though I was holding down a 9-to-5 job. I mean, this is like the archives.
Absolutely.
But that activism continued.
Yeah.
And it always led me back here in terms of what was happening here throughout the state and what have you. I was always concerned about what was happening in South Georgia. South Georgia was, to me, was the gem of the South of, it was home, and so I always cared about what was going on here, politically and socially.
Wow. Well, one of the things that I think about a lot is there are a lot of organizations, there's a lot of boards, and there's a lot of things that want to get off the ground. And it seems that you've been a part of a lot of things that have not just formulated and discussed and became like, just a brainchild for different things, but being actually seeing things take place, because it does take a lot of work. What are some key elements that you see in an organization that helps them get from an idea to an actual action that helps produce the results that they're looking for?
Well, I think people, first of all, have to be motivated, and I think when whatever the objective is, when those objectives are laid out, then I think that people can really chart their way in terms of how they can contribute. Mm-hmm. That's been my whole the way that I've been able to navigate. That is to make sure that we know to try to anticipate what's coming down the road. Mm-hmm. And but first of all, you have to really commit to the purpose of what it is that you begin to that road you begin to travel, and yeah.
That's really good. That's really good. I heard a few years ago, and I've used it a few times, this phrase, clarity is kindness. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to get people from one point to the next, you have this, leaders always have been to that point, and their job is to come back and lead the way through the path. Mm-hmm. And got to have a strong vision. It's got to be clear. And then you need some goals that are achievable at the ground level. If it's too lofty up here, people don't know how to grab it. And so your job is to try to make it as clear as possible. Here's how you can participate in that.
And most importantly, being able to listen, because you want to get those perspectives from people around you as well.
Yeah.
And but that to me is a key thing.
That's beautiful.
To be able to listen.
Because when people begin to share a vision, they begin to get inspired by the same thing and engaged. And then when results do take place, the people that have been on the outside are like, oh, oh, there's something there, and then they start to engage, and that's always hard with leadership and doing something. Is you're always putting yourself out there first, and if people can see you go through that, they'll be maybe more inclined to be a part of that. But it's hard at the initial pieces of it.
One of the challenges we face is that as veterans of the civil rights movement, many of us have transitioned, and so we recognize how important it is to engage this generation of people to. One of the things that we talked about at Georgia Southwestern recently, and I've been very, very excited about. There are some professors that I've met, like Professor Kutzler, Susan Bragg, who put on this symposium with the students, and they're engaging their students in struggles that are going on today. And I was very encouraged by that. And my whole, when I began to speak to this generation now, is that I talk to them about we've come full circle in that in terms of the things that we fought 50, 60 years ago, we're having to revisit those same struggles. And I actually thank them for the most recent election, because I think that we're in a very, very, very precarious, dangerous moment in this country where we're going to need another generation of activists to take up the struggle that exists today. And in many ways, it's more dangerous than it was 50, 60 years ago. We have been threatened. The Voting Rights Act, which was passed 50, 60 years ago, has almost been shredded. And we have politicians now who are willing to completely do away with it. Women's rights, all of these things are back on the front burner. And I think that's because we get past certain issues and we think we've solved them all, but we've never had reconciliation in this country in terms of the race question in this country. And so we tend to revisit those same struggles over and over again. But until we do that, we will continue to do that.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's more important now. The struggle now is more important now, that people who have become complacent have to come out of that and become engaged once again in this country.
Yeah,
it's critical.
And this is one of the reasons why we even started this podcast, is because I have mentioned a few times that we have forgotten how to people. We forgot that we're not just here to be transactional, but we're actually here to be relational, and that the more and more of the idea that we truly care for one another will multiply in such a way that it will make even larger impacts in the world around us. And I think you talked about your conversation with young students. I would love to hear, because students right now, from what I understand, and I'm a part of it too, is social media didn't exist 50 years ago. The amount of information, the amount of distractions, let's just say, from everyday events, or maybe too much of a distraction in a particular area of the world, but not locally, because local impact is huge. So when you're talking with students, how are they initially? Well, let me say it this way. Number one, what is your message to the students, to the young generation? And then we'll kind of get into kind of how are they responding to that and things like that. So kind of what is your message to the?
Well, the message is become engaged. It's not enough to go and to an institution for 4 years and just think only of your career, your own career path, where you're going to go from there. But look at the conditions around you. If not around you, then your neighbors. Someone who is different from you,
Yeah.
And but pay attention to those things and become engaged and try to become a vessel in terms of how you're going to try to impact that person's life positively.
Yes.
And so that's the message that I give. I try to talk a lot about, when I come back here, for instance, in Americus, I noticed there's been a lot of progress, I'm still concerned about a school system that's pretty much as segregated as it was 50 years ago. You know what I mean? I recall when people like Robertina first enrolled at Americus High, the 4 students that broke that barrier, and immediately the Southland Academy opened up. And I'm not sure if there are other private institutions now, but school integration was fought vigorously, you know.
Yeah.
And so that concerns me that there's a new high school out here now. It's a beautiful facility, state of the art, you know, it's beautiful. But it's probably 95% African American, I believe, something like that. I could be mistaken, but I think that's pretty much what it is. So it's troubling to me that we aren't the races aren't that closer together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think those are issues that still have to be dealt with. It troubles me that we still have a Confederate statue over in Reese Park here.
Okay.
It's on the grounds there. It troubles me that Bethesda Baptist Church, which is one of the historic churches here that we had mass meetings, civil rights mass meeting, is still named after Forrest, who Forrest Avenue.
Okay.
Who was one of the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, you know, who actually led a massacre of 400 African-American Union soldiers.
Wow.
They had been captured and he massacred them. So these remnants that people still tend to hold on to. And so, and that's what I mean about the reconciliation has never been, this country's never had one. Like South Africa, for instance, that when apartheid came down, there was this whole period of the races coming together and just owning what had happened in the country, and then all of a sudden deciding that they're going to reconcile and do something about it. That's never happened in America. What we tend to do is you know, we'll pass a Civil Rights Act, we'll pass a Voting Rights Act, and then 50 years down the road, we have forces now in this country who are prepared to go to a race war. You know?
Yeah.
That's real. And so, and why is that? Because we haven't had that union and reunion. When you look at, I never could have imagined that since Brown versus Board, we now have people in this country who want to shut down libraries, ban books, and attack school board members who want to be more open and more diverse in studies that their children get. But that's happening today, you know, and so that's something everyone should be concerned about. It's a very dangerous time in this country, and that's why I think that it's more important now for people to become engaged and not become complacent. Go to a school and get a degree and then move on and just chart your own career path, and that's it. It's a recipe for more strife and more turmoil in the country.
So how do you feel like the students are receiving that message? Do they feel like do you feel like they're becoming engaged?
They've been very receptive, yeah. In fact, there are some people who have volunteered time. There's a couple of people who volunteered to help us do oral history interviews. You know, in my generation, we're not as up on the technology and social media and what have you, so we need people to help us navigate that whole process, you know. Getting our word out on social media platforms. And so we need these young people to come in to guide us, you know. And we have something for each other, I think. We have their youth, we have their ingenuity, we have that lived experience, and we want to try to mesh those two together so that we can sort of work together. It's break down the barrier of a generation.
Yeah, what you had kind of mentioned or alluded to some some form of there are things to celebrate as in your life personally, or just as a movement is concerned. When you get together, you say, look, there's a lot of things that we're going to be working on. Yeah. Let's celebrate some of the things that we have. What are some things that you feel like, just personally or professionally, that you get to share as far as the celebration is concerned, as an encouragement to you to keep also moving forward?
I'm sorry, I missed the
Just a form of celebration, like a personal celebration of your own life and life experiences, and going, I'm a part of this movement. I've got some personal celebrations, or just like professional or collective celebrations. Just like, hey, we get the chance to look back and say, we're still going forward, but here goes some things that we're thankful for. And it helps us to motivate us to keep going.
Yeah. There's so much work to be done, I think. But I think that we can always be encouraged by what we personally think we have to offer in terms of making things better. That's what I try to instill in younger people, that there's a lot of work to be done, and it can be done if we just pull ourselves together and see the task ahead and move on it.
Yeah. I mean, you had even mentioned that before voter registration became a big deal here, you said it was like less than 200 people registered. And so, and obviously, again, there's more to do. But I'm pretty sure that as you guys were engaging in that for the first time, people felt as if they can engage in the political system, and there was a little bit of excitement and seeing that it's a part of the process. Is let's continue to get people involved. In that.
Yeah, they moved from being able to register to vote to running their own candidates. That was always the goal. You have someone like Juanita Wilson, who was jailed with her sister in Leesburg. Who became the principal of the high school that we were not allowed to go to.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And so you have those victories that you can point to and show people what happens as a result of your activism, as a result of you caring about the conditions that you came under. And
I just interviewed Sheriff Eric Bryant, and just seeing from the people that are putting you in prison to now I'm the sheriff of the county. Those are things to look back on and go, wow, okay, there is movement here, and we can continue to move forward.
Yeah, there are always instances. The sheriff at the time was Fred Chappell. And I believe it was Martin Luther King who called him the meanest man in the world after he was jailed there that weekend. Well, years later, when I was working at the state archives, I had become engaged in the theater in Atlanta, and I met Sheriff Chappell's son.
Wow.
He's in theater. And attended a couple of parties, theater people with him. Totally different person. So at the time, it was hard for me to understand how he came out the way he did. Very progressive, cared about social issues, had no problems with mixing with people of different races, Yeah. And here, this guy, sheriff, he abused us at that time,
Wow.
And so we had conversations about it. That was reconciliation.
Yeah.
For us.
I was about to say, how was that just for you and for him?
Yeah. And I don't know where he is now, but this was during the mid-'70s, I would say. I had a chance to meet him.
Wow. That's amazing. So let me ask you this. So you talked about just, again, encouraging younger people to engage. What are some practical ways that I think you had mentioned some of them, but what are some practical ways where people can engage right now with what you're working on?
What we're doing now is trying to create a civil rights and cultural center with the project with what was known as the Americus Colored Hospital.
Okay.
In that facility, we envision having, we've been collecting documentation for the past decade, actually. Photographs, papers, documents, conducting some oral histories and what have you. We want to create a gallery space to show these documents. but we'll also have a permanent collection gallery that would bring in local artists to show their work.
Wow.
We are planning to have programming that engages in poetry, writing, creative writing, theatrical performances. The amphitheater will be for performances as well as teaching behind the center. We will actually have a room that's going to be a clinic that's going to kind of duplicate what the hospital did initially.
Oh, wow.
It'll actually be facilitated, and it'll be staffed that community can come in and have their blood pressure checked, vital signs and what have you, things like that. And I mentioned the community garden, which will be there as well, behind the center. It'll have a library. During the Civil Rights Movement, when we couldn't go to the local library, we engaged students from the north in other cities to send books to Americus. We wound up with a collection of about 8,000 books.
Wow.
Through those efforts, and we set up a library there. We had a freedom school, a freedom center, operated by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we taught literacy classes there, taught people how to pass the literacy test in order to be able to register to vote. It was also a place where meetings were centered around strategy for working in the community, whether it would be voter registration, canvassing, and what have you, or whether it would be arranging for people to be picked up, taken down to the courthouse to register. And just where the activity would be. So these things will be, we're going to have a theater. We didn't know there was a bottom level to that building until we got inside. There's actually a small basement, which will be a theater. And we're going to be showing film, showing some of the documentaries, and also the oral history that people have agreed to do.
That's amazing.
So it'll be a center that will be fully active and interactive in a sense.
Well, I had heard about this. That's one of the reasons why, I wanted you to be a guest, and we're really looking forward to that. I have a question about number one, when did the Americus Colored Hospital close officially? And then when did the organization get the rights to be able to kind of move forward in something like a museum or things like that?
The hospital operated from 1923 to 1953.
Okay.
And during that time, when it opened, it was the only facility in Southwest Georgia that trained African-American doctors, treated the patients, trained midwives and nurses. So it closed in 53, and in 55 it was purchased by a group of women called the City Federation of Colored Women's Club. Okay. They are an affiliate of the National Colored Women's Club, which was founded in D.C. in 1887. Okay. One of the founding members was Phyllis Wheatley. And so their motto has always been lifting as we climb. And that organization consisted of 5 or 6 individual clubs who came together and formed this federation.
And it was to preserve it or to restart it?
What they wanted to do and what they did was they purchased the building for $8,000, and Citizens Bank over here were the ones who financed that. Okay. They paid $3,000 down. The bank financed the rest. And they opened up a nursery and daycare center for working women. And so they hired a local pastor who happened to be a carpenter, who sort of converted it from the hospital and and converted it into a center. And so they were the ones who managed it, paid all the bills. And there was a Boys and Girls Club at one time. At one time, there was a food pantry there for the community. Wow. So they had all these different initiatives as they continued. There are not that many members now. Many of them have transitioned. So in 2018, we had been looking for a place that would possibly be a facility that we could house our documents and create a center. And so we came together, and after several talks and discussion with them, we signed a 100-year lease with them for $1.
Wow.
And we pledged that we would be used for nothing else other than the Civil Rights and Cultural Center, which they agreed to. We signed a memorandum of understanding, and so when this was 2018, that was the same year we applied for a grant to rehabilitate the building from the National Park Service under their Civil Rights African American Preservation Grants Program.
Okay.
And we got our first grant in 2019. You apply 1 year, and then grants are announced the next year.
Yeah.
That was $500,000. The next year we applied again. We were awarded another $500,000 the next year. We missed out on the third year, but on the fourth year we got another $500,000. So we're at $1.5 million now.
Wow.
But it's going to take much more to complete the job and do what we want to do with the building itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had an additional question. In '53, when it closed, was there a reason why it closed?
In '50, they built a new hospital.
Okay.
The new hospital, which was in the Jefferson
That's
Street.
the one that the tornado got. Is that the one you're talking about? Okay.
And so they closed the colored hospital because they had been receiving some funds from the city. I got to say that one of the biggest supporters for the colored hospital was what was then called the Junior Welfare League.
Okay.
It's now the Junior Service League. And this was a white group, and as amazing as it sounds, they had a integrated board at that time, and they did a tremendous job in terms of helping the hospital stay open and what have you. The woman who was the financial officer name was Lillian Dudley, who herself had two sons who were doctors, who physicians here. And she kept the books for the hospital and literally kept it running.
Wow.
She ran a tight ship there. And so when it closed, the black doctors who worked there were not allowed to go to... The new hospital had what they built. They built a colored wing on the back of the hospital for black folk. But the doctors could not practice there. They were not allowed to practice there. So what happened was that they had to leave town to find work. And because of that, it devastated what had become a growing black middle class. In other words, you had these black physicians in the city who supported other black businesses like the ones on Cotton Avenue. In other words, whereas a dollar might have turned over once, when they had this episode of black commerce and you had this growing black middle class, the dollar turned over 5 or 6 times in our community.
Wow.
And so people were beginning to thrive a little bit. But when they left, they kind of broke down that growing black middle class. It devastated it.
Wow.
And so that still resonates today. If at one point in time, Forsyth Street had these huge Victorian homes like the ones kind you see over in Reese Park, blacks on both sides of the street. And you had a bustling Cotton Avenue epicenter of black commerce, you know. So it closed down because of that. And it took a long time for the community to recover from that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, coming back to the current the vision for it, you had mentioned a community garden, and you were mentioning that at the time there was also a garden for people to come and pick. I mean, that's just amazing. It's just encouraging to know that as people walk through this upcoming museum, that they're going to be able to participate. They're going to be able to see the stories and engage in with that. And so I'm really looking forward to that, and really looking forward to taking my children through it and letting them experience it. Go ahead.
We also anticipate having traveling exhibitions come through as well that could possibly be on loan.
Okay.
So that we get a diverse range of things that keeps the exhibitions constantly changing. There'll be a permanent exhibition there.
That's right. Okay.
But we will have a traveling exhibition space as well.
That's great. Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, like I said, there's a lot of history here, and you kind of have to get the stories from the individuals. But doing things like this helps it just continue to spread out and let people know how important Americus is to America history. So I was going to ask another question about the project with the students. You'd mentioned that they can be a part of that in some way.
Yeah.
Is that just financially, or is it just getting the word out, or is it volunteering? What could they do?
All of that.
Okay.
Financially, volunteering. Volunteering is key at this point in time. People who do all kinds of. We need people in who, as I mentioned before, in terms of who can write, who enjoy writing, people who can engage in social media platforms, grant writing. We just need young people to engage in a whole host of activities.
Yeah, absolutely.
That can help.
Absolutely.
We want them to know that they can participate and they can contribute at whatever level. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm really encouraged. One of our first interviews was the first interview was Miss Raven Payne, and she had mentioned, just some of the initiatives that she had started of trying to keep people that are here, keep people investing here, keep people engaged here, that, the college students that come from here, the high school students that are here. From what I understand, I think Mr. Walter Knighton mentioned that I think 95% graduation rate in Americus, and so there are a lot of young, intelligent men and women that could come in here, continue to invest here, like you said, for the betterment of the community. And so, go and, maybe go to college, but then come back here and continue to invest in here in some way. Or with technology now, you can do some off-site things as well. So I was going to ask you, when living up in Atlanta now, when you describe Americus to people, how do you describe Americus?
I describe it today as a place that has great potential. I've seen a lot of changes. Some things have remained the same, but I've seen a lot of changes in terms. I'm excited now about when I come here now and I see young people engage a lot. I was talking to a friend who has a business down on the corner down here, and I'm excited that they're excited about the opportunities that they see here. That's very significant for me because it's something that I've always wanted. I've always envisioned. Didn't quite see when I was here, but when I actually live here. But I'm encouraged by that when I come back now and see that.
That is good.
There's excitement and there's opportunity, I believe. I'm really excited about the new school out here that I had a chance to visit. And it's like a small college campus.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so I'm thinking that out of that is going to be very, very helpful for the city itself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, as far as when we look to the future of Americus, next 5, 10, 15 years, I like to pitch it this way. If resources weren't an option, what are some things that you would love to see, kind of vision casting? What are some things you would love to see in Americus as it relates to whether it's businesses, whether it's perception, whether it's relationships? What would be some things that you would love to see in the next 10, 15 years?
I think most of the relationships, and of course, I want to be able to see the city continue to flourish with the businesses, new businesses. one of the things that we anticipate that will happen with the center that we're envisioning is that it's not only going to be good for Americus, but for the entire Southwest Georgia area. It's going to be another cultural base, I think. And I've been impressed by what is taking place with the Cultural Bureau in terms of the how they've been actually promoting the city. I understand that several new businesses have relocated here in the last several months, and so we want to be a part of that. That brings in new thought, new ways of doing things, and just being a creative force for the city itself. And that, I think, is going to inform people and bring more people into the city.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I'm really centered on in terms of my vision for the center and the vision of most people who work on the committee.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So I like to ask a question. It's kind of a threefold question. It's, when we see a vision, we see kind of that future. I like to ask three questions. Number one, in order to see that future take place, what are some things that we need to start doing? What are some things that we need to stop doing? And what are some things that we need to never stop doing? And that again, just kind of put some handrails onto this vision that you have. So is there anything in particular that you could think of? Yeah, we need to start doing this. We need to stop doing that. Yeah. And we need to never stop doing this.
Yeah. First of all, putting ourselves in the other person's place, and seeing other people's situation, and always trying to be creative about ways that people can be engaged. There's a lot of forces today that are kind of tearing us apart in many ways. And so I think that if we can just concentrate on the positive things that we can do to uplift each other, if we can do that, then I think that that's going to bring in those positive forces into our lives personally and in the people's lives around us, I think. I think that's the key in terms of just being able to be positive about what you want to see and make sure that you draw those people towards you, try to bring those positive people into your life, and I think that's going to bode well for a city that's going to be able to bring in people who will be able to share that vision, and to make the city better for everybody.
That's awesome. Like I said at the beginning, the values of diligence and the idea of just continuing to move forward, not slowing down, just being there for the long game. I think if we can just continue to do that and see, hey, listen, we want to see wins. We don't like seeing losses, but no matter what happens, we're just going to keep moving forward. We want to be diligent. And so thank you for that. Thank you for that part of your story. It reminds me, even something as small as my daughter today, she built a bridge for her class. It was one of these, science kind of things. And she built a bridge that immediately fell apart. And the other student said, oh, it's not going to make it. And so when I saw her today, she was in tears, not only because her bridge didn't make it, but because people were being, being rude to her. Yeah. And I just told her, I said, baby, her name is Jessa. I said, Jessa, we are a family that takes risks. And anytime you do something for the first time, you're going to blow it. You're not going to do well because you don't know what you're doing. But we can't be afraid to take risks. We can't be afraid to fail because failure is a part of the process of learning how to do it right. And so, again, thank you so much for continuing to take risks, engaging in this community, and doing it in a way that, again, builds relationships. With a world and a society and sometimes social media that's constantly trying to tear us apart. The more and more we have conversations like this, it builds this trust that we can move forward together. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. So as we kind of like land the plane, some of the things that we do at the very end of the podcast is just ask some kind of rapid fire questions just to get to know you a little bit more. And so I just only have a few here, but if you wouldn't mind, I know that you're into art. And so is there any particular pieces of art that you just really enjoy that help motivate you, or that you've just, or maybe a piece of art that you thought you would never see, but you got a chance to see maybe in person or like that?
Well, let me back up a minute. Because
go ahead.
I got up, when I left while I was working at the State Archives, I was drawn toward art. I lived in a community, Southwest Atlanta, that was a very cultural-oriented community where you had writers, painters, and drummers, people who made music. And we had this huge festival each year in the community. And I skipped the part where I had been drafted into the military, and while I was in the military, I picked up a camera.
Okay.
And so when I came back to Atlanta, I was always moved by images. I think that sort of something that spilled over from the civil rights movement, because we were propelled by images in the movement, whether it was a poster urging people to go register to vote, whether it was a photograph, of a demonstration, something like that. So I was drawn toward these images, and I had photographers like Gordon Parks and things like that, one of my favorite photographers. And so I would take my camera and shoot these street images. And then on the weekends, I would load my van up and go out in the community and frame my pictures, and I go to these festivals that way. And then in doing that, I became aware of artists from around the world, from around the country. And I was drawn particularly toward African art at this time. A lot of it abstract, but most of it figurative work by African artists. And I wound up opening up a gallery while I was still at the archives. And when I got to the point where I felt that I could do this, I resigned at the archives and opened up an art gallery. And I carried the works of, as I said, I concentrated on African-American artists.
Yeah.
And the artists like Elizabeth Catlett, Thornton Dowell, who was a folk artist, who would make his art from found objects, make this huge collage of just things he would find in his yard.
Yeah, wow.
And make these wonderful pieces of artwork. Benny Andrews, Romeo Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, all these people. Those were some of my favorites. So I just kind of immersed myself in their artwork, and I eventually began to carry, not the original works, I couldn't afford them, but I carried the reproductions, the posters and things like that, serigraphs, lithographs and things like that. And that became another form of activism, continuing to push these positive images that uplifted African American people because we needed that. Yeah. And we still do. And to let them know that there were these working artists out there who were actually making a living with their artwork, And so that was important. So that was another form of activism in itself.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. I mean, and I mentioned before that I probably wouldn't recognize all, because I love art, but I'm not into like finding who the people are. I just see it on image. I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. So I'm definitely going to go ahead and check out some of these particular artists, and people can Google that too.
Yeah. And the beauty of it was you're uplifting the artists themselves. You're giving them venues that they never had before. Because African American artists had very limited ways to show their works, It's opened up quite a bit now, but at that time, the options were very limited. So it was important that they get to show their work at some venue.
That's good. Well, let me ask you this: as far as kind of just some rapid fire, we like to talk. I like to eat. I have different venues and places that I like to eat. Is there a particular food that you like, or a place that you like to go, like a restaurant? That you enjoy?
I go to a lot of West Indian food joints. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, I got an affinity for that. My wife used to work for United Airlines when we met.
Okay.
And we'd go down to the West Indies quite a bit and develop an affinity for that.
That's great. Is there any particular place?
Nothing like good old down-home Southern soul food as well,
right.
you know. So,
is there any place in Atlanta that I need to check out that has some good food?
Beautiful restaurant. Mm-hmm. It's called the Beautiful Restaurant.
Okay.
On the south side. Virgil's Grill.
Okay.
It's in East Point, you know.
That's great.
This is it. Soul food. Virgil's Gullah Restaurant is in East Point. That's a nice restaurant as well. But
I'll need my friend Prabhu. He knows a little bit more about Atlanta than I do, so we can maybe take a trip up there and go check out some of these places.
There's so many places. It seems like every week somebody's opened up a new joint. You know.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Do you have a favorite sport that you like to watch or like to play or engage in or?
I never played organized sports, but I used to play sandlot football growing up. I like to watch football.
Okay.
I've been watching the March Madness.
Oh yeah.
I'm looking forward to the Final Four. I like to watch sports. You know.
Yes.
I studied karate for about 5 or 6 years.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that came later on. Yeah,
that's good. Okay, do you have a favorite family or a friend activity that you like to do?
I like gallery hopping. That's my wife and I. We love to go to. We have these Friday. I also worked at the High Museum of Art.
I looked that up. That's a beautiful place.
And so that came after the gallery closed.
Okay.
But I continued in that same mode in terms of working for the High Museum of Art.
Oh, wow.
So we spent a lot of time visiting galleries. Mm-hmm. You know, on Fridays evening, there's usually an opening or something like that. You go in to view the artwork and you meet new people. Mm-hmm. So we like doing that.
I love it. All right, last question. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go?
I want to go. Well, I want to go back to Africa. I've only been there once.
Okay.
And
where in Africa do you?
Ghana.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's so many places I want to go. I mean, there's no one place that I could pick out. But
would you like to do some more traveling?
I'd love to do more traveling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
That's great. I have a friend of mine who I recently met the last 2 years. He's a church planter. He's a pastor. Mm-hmm. He's from Malawi. And my son has always been intrigued with Africa. And I told him when he turned 13, 14 that we would go kind of on a vision trip over there. We'd maybe spend a week or two with our pastor friend and get a chance to see that area and see if it's something that he wants to continue to pursue, you know, by being there and things like that. But he always tells me how beautiful it is there. So
it's been over. This was during the early 80s. You know, so much has changed since that time, you know. So I'd like to go back and wasn't quite ready when I first went because I wasn't. I missed out on a lot of things, and it was only for maybe a few days, you know. But I'd like to go back and spend some time there.
Wow.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
When, where, and what is it?
That was at my gallery. That was probably mid-'80s. Yeah. And that artist, William Tolliver, he passed away about 9 years ago. Very young age, from Louisiana.
Wow.
And but this guy is great. And That picture was taken during the National Black Arts Festival, which is annual celebration in Atlanta, and I always remember that photograph because that was the year that Cicely Tyson, the actress, came by the gallery.
Oh, wow.
And bought one of his pieces. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. And I got to beat her during that year. Yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, that might have been the piece of artwork that she got.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to ask. Would you know where that piece is currently, or but maybe?
Yeah, I think that's the piece she actually bought.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Where'd you get that?
That's your Facebook profile.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a joy to learn a little bit more about you and what's going on with this museum that's coming. We're really excited about it. And just for the future of Americus, we want to continue to see us move in the right direction. And so thank you so much for your efforts and for your diligence, like I said. Yeah, and we'd love to have you back, maybe when it's complete, or maybe there's a particular thing that we can promote together. So
I'd be glad to come back and give updates and what have you.
Awesome.
It's hard to give a timetable right now in terms of when it might be completed, because I'm learning as we go along, and that the process is there are a lot of things that have to be worked out in terms of construction, reconstruction, and what have you. But I will try and keep you as informed as we can. Keep the community informed.
Yeah,
So I'd love to come.
absolutely. We're thankful that it's coming, and so we've got any benchmarks, just continue to post it. You guys have a Facebook page that you can also follow with some of those updates.
Exactly.
So if you have something, you can message you all and or at least email you, and people can reach out to you individually too if they're interested. So
great,
awesome. Well, like I said, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and we look forward to the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam.
Well, thank you.
Man, this was a blessing to us, definitely.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.